for Miriam Chaya Bat Bracha, which, I speak about it again and again, so you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with all the situation and the story.
Also for being one woman, Leah ben Raquel.
Lefuah Shlema? Leah Bat Raquel. Yeah, Lefuah Shlema, Leah Bat Raquel, B'soch Shachal Yisrael. And everybody who's sick in the Jewish world should have a Lefuah Shlema b'mehel b'yameinu. So, before we actually begin with speaking of Yosef's story, I want to start actually with a little story that I read that I found was very apropos to this topic. There was once a couple, and this couple, they were trying to have kids. For many, many years, they've been trying to have kids. They've been going from specialist to specialist, from rabbi to rabbi, and nothing doing. No kids, not even no pregnancy, nothing. And eventually they tried in vitro fertilization, they tried all these special procedures, and nothing doing. In fact, the doctors told them there's no way that you're going to be able to have a child. So they went, and they said, you know what? What could you do? And, they became down, they became depressed, and eventually they figured, listen, if we can't have a child of our own, excuse me, let us at least adopt one. We can at least adopt a child. So they made some phone calls, and they found out that there's a certain agency in Israel that has a very long list of Jewish kids that needs a home. So they thought, awesome, let's go. They traveled. They went out to Israel, and the day that they landed, they went into this. Or the organization to fill out the paperwork. They realized there's going to be a ton of paperwork. So they get in there. This family, the name is Shapiro. This is a true story. So the husband, Yosef, he goes inside over there and he starts filling out all the paperwork. And, all the regular paperwork that he was aware of, like financial stuff, ability to live, ability to love, yada, 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 all the basic stuff. And then they asked the very interesting questions. They asked him, name 5 things that are your most favorite things, the most desirable, that you love the most in the entire world. So, he's thinking over there, and he's like, I'm a religious Jew, and so he thinks, first, number 1 thing, God. Number 2, the thing that he loves the most, the Torah. Number 3, he starts thinking maybe prayer. Number 4, after he finishes that, he's like, all right, maybe music, or whatever it is that he ends up putting on those 5 things. So he goes and he says that he goes on to the next page, and the next page says, now what I want you to do is you have to sign that you're willing to give up all those 5 things that you love, and you're going to love this child more than those 5 things. And he's sitting over there, and he's like, I can't do that. I can't. What do you mean, love the? God is my whole being is spirituality. God, Judaism, the Torah. I can't just forego all that. So he's telling this to his wife. His wife, couldn't know what to say. So he goes and says, let me speak to the manager. I'm sure he's going to understand. So they go to the manager and say, listen, we're going to love this child unconditionally. You know that. You see us. He says, but I can't write that. I'm going to love this child more than God, more than Torah, more than everything. It goes against everything that I represent, everything that I've been living with my whole life. So the manager says, I understand you. I know what you're talking about. He's a religious guy. He says, but just sign it. No one's going to ask you, no, there's no thought police over here that's going to be like, no being Jewish. No, they're not going to ask you. Just sign it and, go back to whatever way you want to be. So Yosef's going, he says, I can't do that. I can't, even on paper, I can't put that. How do I put it down that I don't love God? I'm going to throw it all away. I can't. I physically can't do that. So they're going back and forth, and the guy says, listen, just sign your name. No one cares. As long as you sign it, you get the thing. If you don't sign it, there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. So they're going back and forth, and eventually, Yosef's not interested in signing it, and the guy says, "Listen, if you're not signing it, we can't complete the paperwork, and we can't continue with the procedure, with the application." So they said, "Fine," and they close up shop and they leave. And this is where the husband and wife, they just they lost it all. They're like something they've been living for their whole life. They wanted children, they couldn't have it, and finally they had it on the tips of their fingers. They had the ability to fly home with a baby, and now they got nothing. And they fly home in a very, quiet, very downtrodden way. When they get to America, they start thinking. Yosef starts thinking. He says, "Listen," he says, "Who's the one that gives the children?" He says, "It's not these, not this agency, not this, organization." He says, "Everything comes from God. No matter if it's adoption, it's not that. Everything comes from God." He says, "I'm not going to lose out by doing that. I'm not going to lose out by giving up something for God." And with this newfound, feeling of urging of strength that he has for Hashem and the belief and the Emunah that he has, they're able to push it off a little longer. 10 months later, she gives birth to twin boys. True story. She gives birth to twin boys, and he's sitting over there. The father is sitting over there, looking into the crib and in the hospital, seeing those two boys, and he's thinking, he's like, you know, my wife was not physically able to have any children. She wasn't able to have any children, and now I'm looking at two twin boys. He says everything is from God, and he said, and he goes on to say, he says, and you know what? And he says, you know why we have children right now? Because at this point in time, only when I left Israel, I realized that nobody could help me other than God. And I came to that realization, I realized that if there's nothing else other than God, that's when God stepped through. And that's the way that we live, and that's the way we're going to see how Yosef lived his life. And we're going to see from Yosef, the way that Yosef lived his life, we're going to see some amazing, amazing lessons that should be and will be life-changing to you, both in Emunah and in Mussar. So in order to start off Yosef's story, we have to go back a little bit to Rachel, his mother. So Rachel, Yaakov really wanted to marry Rachel. It was very famous, everybody's well aware of it. And Lavan, his father-in-law, made a little trick. And he says, okay, no problem, work for Rachel for 7 years. At the end of the day, he goes and he switches. He switches the whole setup, and he gives her Leah instead of Rachel. And and he's married to Leah. And then after a while, Yaakov complains and he says, okay, you know what? I'm going to give you Rachel also, and he marries Rachel as well. Leah is blessed with children. She gives her Yaakov her handmaid, also blessed with children. Rachel's handmaid, also blessed with children. There's already 10 children, 10 tribes out. Rachel has no children yet. So all of a sudden she gets blessed with a child, and that's Yosef. Yosef is the 11th tribe. He comes into the world being his mother's only child and his father's favorite, because his father loved Rachel more than everybody. So you think about the way that he grew up. I want you to, when I'm saying over the story, try to picture his life. Try to actually put yourself in his position. So he's he gets born into the mother who's a favorite wife, the father who loves not only the wife, but now Yosef becomes his favorite, and we soon see Yosef is undoubtedly his favorite child. And they build this strong connection, and Yosef is learning, and he's growing, and he's everything is amazing. And then suddenly he gets a little bit older, and he starts hearing that his mother is praying and crying to God for another child. He realized he's the only child, and she wasn't blessed with anybody else. Night after night, after she tucks him in, Rachel goes and she starts crying for God, please give me another child, please give me another child. And one day, when he's about 7 years old, they come in and tell him, guess what? Mommy's expecting. She says, she's going to have another child. And he's thinking, oh man, I'm going to have a brother, maybe I have a sister. And he's so excited and he's so happy he's going to have another child. 9 months go by, and Yosef is about 7, 8 years old, and I believe he was 8 years old, and, she goes into labor. And she goes into labor, and after the labor, Yaakov goes inside to Yosef, white as a sheet. He says, Yosef, sit down, I need to talk to you. And the father Yaakov starts telling Yosef, says, you got a baby boy. And he's like, oh, I'm so happy, Baruch Hashem. So why are you so sad? What's going on? And Yaakov says, he's like, I don't know how to tell this to you, but your mommy's not here anymore. And he's like, what do you mean my mommy's not here anymore? Where's my mommy? And this, he said the 4 words that no 8-year-old boy should ever hear. And it says, your mommy passed away during the delivery. And that shattered his entire life. Everything that he had, his whole foundation went right down the drain. All his 10 other brothers, they all had mommies to go to that night. Yosef went home alone. Him and his father was the one sitting Shiva. Binyamin was born, but he was still a baby. And his entire life, from having that strong structure, just completely fell apart. He would no longer be tucked in by his mother. He would no longer hear his mother's prayers. And it's so unfortunate to have the little orphan at such a young age. And it was really hard. But Yaakov worked really hard with him. He went, and he learned with him, and he brought him up. And slowly, Yosef became building up greater and greater and greater until he was having dreams. He was learning Torah. That he knew everything. It says that Yaakov Avinu taught everything that he learned in Shem and Evel to Yosef. So he from all the way down, he started climbing all the way back up. And then one day, when he's 17 years old, Yaakov goes to Yosef and says, Yosef, listen, your brothers went out with the shepherds. Why don't you go out and see what's going on with them? Where are they? So he said, fine. He goes and he starts traveling, and he sees them in the distance, and he sees his brothers, so he starts walking towards them. And meanwhile, one of the brothers say, like, oh, look, it's the dreamer who's coming. And one of the brothers says, maybe we should kill him. And they gave certain reasons why he deserved to be dead, to be mechayev misa. And the other brother said, Reuven said, no, let's not kill him, let's throw him in a pit. Meanwhile, unsuspecting, he goes, he sees, hey brothers, he walks around and he sits right next to them. Meanwhile, they grab him, they take off his coat, his favorite coat that his father made for him. He takes off his coat, he's like, hey guys, what's going on? And he takes they take Yosef and they throw him into the pit. So Yosef's confused, he's like, Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, what's going on? What are you guys doing? He's like, you're my brothers, what are you doing? And they're not answering him. And he's like, you guys are descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the biggest tzaddikim of the generation. Why are you doing this to me? Our forefathers gave other people clothes and food and achnasat orchim. He says, how do you do this to your own flesh and blood? And it says in the Midrashim that they actually moved away. They moved away from him so that they don't hear his cries and his screams, because they had to discuss now what they're going to do with him. So Yosef, 17 years old, stuck in a pit at this point, and screaming and crying and begging for mercy, begging for help. Meanwhile, the brothers are on the side eating a meal, trying to discuss what to do with him. And there's a group of 7 Midianites that they come by, and they hear the screaming, and they hear this. So they look into the pit, and they see this young lad, just sitting over there screaming. So like, what's going on? And they hoist him out of the pit, and they start taking them with him. And all of a sudden, the brothers see that they took Yosef, so they come charging to them, and they're like, what are you doing with our slave? And the Midianite says, slave? Says, this guy looks no more, for anything, you're his slave. Look how noble he looks. Because he looked very, very presentable. He was one of the most handsome people ever lived. So they're like, no. The brother says, he's our slave. We put him in the pit because he was rebellious, and that's why we're putting it. So they said, listen, finders keepers, we got him, the Midianite says, and we're taking him. So, and not only that, the Midianites took out their swords. And they were going to take Yosef by hook or by crook. Meanwhile, Shimon jumped in front of them and yelled this war cry that's deafening, that completely shook them up. And Shimon goes over to them and says, even if you bring all the people where you came from, you will not be able to defeat us. We're the children of Yaakov, and we will decimate you, and you'll be eaten. Your corpses will be eaten by jackals. So they got, they started, they heard the scream and they heard the threats, and they were like, all right. So they backed up a little bit, and they made an agreement. They said, you know what? He says, we'll sell them to you for 20 silver pieces. So they made the agreement, and they sold him. The 7 Midianites went and they took Yosef. So they're traveling with Yosef, and then they're starting to think about it. They're like, wait a minute, maybe we did it. This guy doesn't look like any slave. He's like, maybe he got, maybe he was stolen. Now they're going to be, they're going to catch us and they're going to kill us because we stole the slave. So they realize they want to get rid of him. They want to get rid of him. It doesn't look good for them. So they're seeing them, they're walking, and traveling, by near them is a group of Ishmaelim, of Arabs. And they go over to the Arabs and say, you want to buy the slaves? Great slave, look how handsome he is, yada yada. They sold him, and they said, fine, we'll buy him. So these Arabs buy the slaves. By the way, these are the Arabs that were selling the spice merchants. They were not, which we'll soon speak about. So the Arab take Yosef. Meanwhile, Yosef sees these Arabs and he begs them. He says, please bring me back to my father. He'll pay you handsomely for my return. He says, I was taken here by captive. And he was giving them the whole story. And they were like, yeah, sure. Whatever you say, slave. And they made him walk in the hot desert sun for hours and hours and then they used to beat him and hit him. Every time they used to torture him and hurt him, something else would happen. Supernatural happened. One time there was hurricanes and lightning and thunder happening, and then another time they were hitting them and suddenly they were blind. They were struck blindness and they couldn't. The animals didn't even move. So they realized there's some sort of connection. So these Ishmaelim, they said, listen. He says, pray to your God. He says, if we are really being punished by you, then you could get this away. And if you get this away, then fine. And we'll change our little tactics. And he goes and he prays to God, and everything stops. All the trouble stops. And they realize that something's going on. Something special is with this slave, so to speak. So they decide again they don't want to be involved in this situation. So they go and they bring him to Egypt. And in fact, before they brought him to Egypt, they actually considered of bringing him back to Yaakov. Some of them said, listen, some of the group of the Ishmaelim said, listen, let's go back to, Yaakov. Even if we just get our money back, let's, get rid of it. Others said, listen, we've traveled too far. And we're to go back to, it's just too much. Let us go and just drop him off in Egypt. So they decided they're close to Egypt. They're going to go bring him to Egypt. So they bring him down to Egypt. And they meet people from the tribe of Midan, if I'm not mistaken. The tribe of Midan is from the son of Abraham. After Sarah died, he married Keturah, which was, some say it's Hagar, and he had some children of them. So one of the people were from this tribe that they sold him. So they sold it to him for 9 shekels. And they went and they bought it from him. They said, listen, we hear that Potiphar is looking for a slave. Potiphar was a very wealthy person to do in the Egyptian society, and we heard he's looking for slaves, so they figured let's buy him and we'll sell him, make some money on it. We'll sell him to Potiphar. So they buy him from the Arabs, and by the way, these were the Arabs, like we said before. They were carrying, they were spice merchants, which means is usually the way that the Arabs deal with really really smelly types of materials, petroleum, like really stuff that is smells so bad. And when they were traveling with this nice, sweet-smelling, spices, Yosef, all of a sudden, he's like, wait a minute. He's like, this is not usual for the Arabs to sell this. And he's like, God's trying to send me a sign over here that, he's still with me. And Yosef was able to get the sign through all his troubles from just seeing the smelling of the spices. And this is something we're going to speak about B'ezrat Hashem in depth. So, but anyways, I want to finish going on in the story that so he goes to Potiphar. And Potiphar, they present him the slave Yosef, and Potiphar looks at him. And by the way, there's a midrash that says that Potiphar looked at him because he looked at him in a way that no regular man looks at other man. He actually wanted him for more than just a slave. He, used to swing for the other team, and so it says that he actually wanted, he wanted Yosef. So, in any case, he goes and he takes Yosef, and he's like, something's fishy over here. This guy looks too good to be a slave. He's like, something's wrong over here. He's like, are you sure this guy's a slave? So the tribe of Midan said, yeah, we bought him from Arab merchants. So Potiphar said, you know what, I'll buy him off you, but bring me those Arab merchants. I want to make sure that he's really a slave. So they bring the Arab merchants over, they find him, they bring him down, they say, is this guy really a slave? And they're like, yeah, we bought him from other people. He's a slave. So fine, he took it. By the way, look how God orchestrated it from one to another to another to another, just so that everything will happen that he will be sold as a slave. If you think about it, if it would have been just one person, the guy says, no, I bought it from some brothers, something looked fishy. But one after another, all of a sudden, you couldn't trace it back all the way at the end, and the sale was good, the sale was valid, they thought it was all good and nice and dandy. So, what happened is think about it how Yosef is feeling at this time. First of all, look how not his family doesn't want him. Not even the people that buy him, his masters don't want him. He keeps on changing over from hands to hands to hands to hands, from a new place to a new place. And in fact, it's a lot more serious than you think, because Yosef thought that his whole family was in it, not just his brothers. Because he starts putting two together. He's like, listen, Yaakov, send me to my brothers. And he starts thinking, Abraham and Sarah. He says, about Abraham and Sarah, there was one good kid, one bad kid, Ishmael and Yitzchak. Sarah goes and says, you know what? Kick Ishmael out. It's not good for me. One mother goes and says, get the other child away. Let's go on to the next generation, Yitzchak and Rivka. What does Rivka says? Esav and Yaakov, they don't mix well. Send Yaakov away. I don't want him to get influence with Yaakov and Esav together. Come to this generation, he's like, listen, I don't have a mother to stick up for me. My mother passed away, he says. Right? He says, he passed away when he was 8 years old. Now you're talking about he's 17 years old. Passed away, 9 years ago. So he's going and he's thinking, he's like, maybe the other mothers convinced Yaakov to send me away. And that's why he sent me away, and this is all orchestrated. So at this point in time, Yosef's entire structure came crashing down. Spiritually, physically, everything. He lost everything, from being the top, being the tribe of Yaakov Avinu, to nothing, a slave, and a family disowning him. And this is when let's go back to revisit that one point. He's traveling, and he gets sold to spice merchants. And Chazal say, the Midrashim actually say, which is, if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. You get stolen, you get kidnapped, and the getaway car smells of nice perfume, and you're like, God is here, who cares about Ahmed and all those people stealing me with this screaming Allahu Akbar, I got that, it smells good over here. You're like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? How does he see God in that situation? His entire life comes crashing down. And he sees God because of something smelling? And the answer is yes. He was able to see God in every little detail in life. And we're soon going to see that is going to be his secret of success. His secret of success is seeing God through the unseen. Now, let's go on a little bit more with the story of Yosef. So Yosef goes and he gets into he gets sold to Potiphar at the age of 17. And anybody know what Potiphar's wife's name? Everybody knows her as Eshes Potiphar. So her name was Zulika. Her name was Zulika. She was arguably one of the most prettiest women alive in that time, and you could also say of all time. So she was extremely, extremely beautiful. She was married technically to Potiphar, his new master. So he goes, and Potiphar was the man, Zulika is the woman. Potiphar sees that everything Yosef touches is successful. He's like really good at everything that he does. So he promotes him until he's running his entire household. Potiphar was very well to do. He was a top slave. Top slave of ruling over all the other slaves. And then, when Zulika, when Eshes Potiphar saw him, and she was mesmerized by his beauty, and she was like, I gotta have him. And she non-stop tried to seduce him. And it says 3 times a day she would change her clothes. He would never see her in the same clothes. And he was in this situation for a year, which means this 1 year, he never saw her. 3 times a day she appeared to him, never saw her in the same clothing, in the same wardrobe at the same time. And she non-stop tried to seduce him again and again and again. She did not back down. She definitely did not get any hints. And besides trying to seduce him physically, she also tried to seduce him in the spiritual sense. She says, Yosef, he says, like, why don't you come out? He says, you read stars, right? And Yosef, back then Yaakov taught the children how, everything. Even we'll soon see even stuff that about magic and certain things. So they go, and she goes into the stars and says, you see, in the stars, it says, from me and you is going to come a child. Now, why would it say it in the stars if it's not supposed to be? It's supposed to be. And then he goes and he says, listen, he says, you're a married woman. I can't. He's my master. How am I supposed to go? He gave me everything. He gave me such a promotion. How do I go and stick it in his face? And she says, listen. She starts convincing me that. She said, we're not really married. Like I said before, he swings for the other team. He doesn't really, he never consummated the marriage. And according to Egyptian society, he was never with me intimately, and hence, we're never considered even married. So you could be with me. It's not even going to be a problem. She convinced him from all angles. Now let me ask you a question. Any person alive, today that we could think about, it would be in that situation. Disowned by his family, gets sold into the worst of the worst. He's 18 years old. I don't think, 18 years old, the type of, temptations that 18-year-olds have, is fairly high. He's in his prime of his temptation. He comes in, the most beautiful woman in the entire world, convinces him from the spiritual side, the stars, that he's not even married, everything. Can you resist that? Who can resist that? And yet, Yosef resisted. Not once, day after day after day, he completely resisted. He pushed her off. Unbelievable, the power that he had. So, he goes and, Eshes Potiphar's wife, her friends start seeing her. She's pale, she's losing weight, she doesn't look good. She's like, what's going on with you? You're looking bad. She's like, you don't understand. She says, I had this Hebrew slave in my house. I've been trying to seduce him time and time again, almost a year already, and nothing doing. And her friends started laughing. I was like, you kidding me? A Hebrew? You're trying to seduce a Hebrew? She says, we got the mightiest Egyptian army at your fingertips. You could have everybody you want. She says, what are you worried about a Hebrew slave? And she's like, listen, she says, you never saw this Hebrew slave. She says, if you see him, you'll realize what I'm talking about. So they said, fine, challenge accepted, So they go and she invites him over. She invites him over to their house, and she gives them each a citron. A citron is a etrog. She gives them a etrog and a knife to cut through with it. And then she calls Yosef in. And, the woman, they were sitting in a semicircle. They see Yosef, and they were just mesmerized. And Eshes Potiphar goes to them and says, look at your fingers. And they look at their fingers, all fingers were bloody because they were cutting the etrog. They were so mesmerized by his beauty that they started cutting. Everything was full of blood. And they're like, you're telling me you're cutting off your own hand when you're looking at him. And after they sent them out, they said, you know what? They said I'm going to quote it. They said, it's hardly impossible for someone to look at such a beauty and restrain oneself. That's what they said. That's what the woman said about Yosef HaTzadik. And she says, I can't do it. I don't know what to do. So, the women huddle up and they start, doing their woman talk, and they're like, okay, this is going to be the plan, right? They take out their diaries, and they start, with all the fuzzy pens. They're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to trap them over here, right? All the girlfriends are in on it now. And they go, and she decides that she's going to force him. That's it. Today, there was a certain day that came that nobody was in the palace. Why was nobody in the palace? One of the reasons nobody was in the palace, it was actually 2 interpretations that I saw. Number one, it was Paro's birthday. So everybody went to celebrate Paro's birthday, which is actually one of the first birthdays, and one of the only really birthday celebrations you see in the Torah, is Paro's birthday. Which is an interesting point, which maybe we should speak about it once, about birthdays in Torah. Birthdays in Torah, are you allowed to have a birthday party? Because we see in the Torah, who had a birthday party? Paro. It's a very interesting topic. But in any case, everybody went to Paro's birthday party, so everybody was gone, except that she faked herself that she was not feeling well and she wanted to stay home. Meanwhile, she wanted to really just, get some alone time with Yosef to try to really once and finally seduce him. And there was another interpretation that says that what happened was it was the Nile, which was, one of the main things that the Egyptian society needed, was overflowing. I'm sorry, I just got something in my throat. So, thank you. So the Nile was overflowing, which is a time for celebration, thank you, for merrymaking. So everybody went to the celebration, except for her. Again, she faked that she was sick, and she decided she was going to go in. So it's Yosef and her in the home. Meanwhile, Yosef is doing whatever he's supposed to be doing, and he sees her, so he's always trying to avoid her. And she blocks him in, and she corners him, and she grabs him. She grabs him, and not only that, she takes a dagger out. She takes an actual knife out, and she puts it to the throat. And she's like, I'm going to have you today. She's like, it's going to be my will today, or I'm going to kill you. So somehow Yosef was able to pull away from her. And not only did he pull away from one, while she pulled away, the knife actually dug in, and what happened was his coat got cut, and she was able to rip off his coat. And he grabbed the coat, and he just booked, and he just ran. And you think about it, this guy at this point in time, he's 18 years old. What he went through the past year of his life was completely traumatizing. You think, okay, God said, listen. What? Who?
He wasted a little bit.
No, well, some information saying about that, but we won't bring about that now. Maybe when we talk about his whole story, we'll bring that out, because we don't have time to get into all that details. But in any case, he runs away. So you would think God will say, okay, Yosef, enough. You had enough tests. Now it's, you had a Holocaust for a year in a certain sense. Enough suffering. Now it's, smooth sailing. She tried to seduce you. You overcame it day after day. An impossible thing. That's it. Smooth sailing. And the answer is no. What happened was when Potiphar came home, she said, look what this. And she framed Yosef. She said, he tried to come onto me. And look, I grabbed my coat. I grabbed his coat off me, and that's the proof that he tried to come onto me. And she started screaming and yelling, and eventually they actually took Yosef and they threw him into prison. They said, this is what you do? You tried to seduce my wife when I'm out? And they chucked him into the king's prison. And he was in prison. Anybody know how long he was in prison for? 12 years. Not for a month or two. He wasn't like, was in a holding. By the way, prisons in those days is not like you have, hot food. You're in a pit. It's the worst of the worst. For 12 years. 12 years he sat in a prison for a crime which he did not commit, for doing something that he should have done, and for not messing up. At this point in time, you're like, all right, if he was religious until this point, if anybody happened to nowadays, they would need so much therapy. They would need all the therapists in the world to convene and try to figure out how to destroy this person, how to get this person back. But you look at Yosef. Yosef was still strong. He was still strong. And the question is, how in the world is that even possible? So, Yosef, you would think at this point he'll be like, that's it, I give up. I'm in jail already, that's it. But he doesn't give up. He doesn't, and he starts working in the jail. In the jail, he's successful. He starts becoming successful in the jail, and he starts building himself up in the jail until he's literally running the jail. He's running the jail. This guy does not back down. He's talking about a guy that's just a fighter, just keeps on going. So much so that one day, towards 10 years in, there's somebody comes over to him, and one of the baker and the winemaker, they get up with a gloomy face. Literally a gloomy face. It's not like they came over to him and they're like, hey Yosef, we had a dream, it's bad. They woke up with a gloomy face. So he goes over to them, which means is, for the past, 11 years of his life has been miserable. And he comes over to them and he sees his roommates, his cellmates, in a gloomy face. He's like, hey guys, what's going on? What's wrong? They're like, are you kidding me? This guy just went through what he went through, and he's able to go look at somebody else and say, hey buddy, what's wrong? So they open up to him and said, listen, I had a dream, and the dream, yada yada. They explain the whole dream situation. And it says, Yosef says, okay, let me try to interpret it for you. Maybe I can do it. And I want to share you. We spoke about this briefly at one point when we gave the class on dreams, which we haven't taught anytime. But I want to bring up this point because I feel it brings it very strong on how he interpreted the dreams. Yosef, and we'll do the baker's dream. The baker goes over to him, and he goes over to Yosef and says, listen, first he interpreted the winemaker's dream, and he interpreted it for the good. He said in 3 days' time, you're going to go back to Paro, and you're going to be back, be his Saramashkim, you're going to start serving him again.
That would only happen by the way because he said so.
The baker goes and says, listen, I like that interpretation. I got a dream too. And he goes over to his dream, and he said his dream, what his dream was? He had 3 baskets on his head. The top basket had a bunch of bread inside there, and birds were coming and eating from the breads. So he goes over to Yosef. He's like, so 3 days, 3 baskets, 3 days. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna get out of this prison. So Yosef, he's like, well, yours is a little bit different. He says, your dream actually represents that in 3 days' time, you will be hung by Paro. Good day to you, sir. And that's, that was it. And the guy, and just the way that he interpreted it, that's how the Torah says, that's exactly how 3 days' time, the winemaker, he got back into power. 3 days' time, the baker got hung. So the question is that the Dubno Maggid asks, he says, how did Yosef know that? How was he able to interpret it? And the Dubno Maggid explains, because he was able to see the details and everything. He goes over and says, you know how he figured out that the baker, and we'll explain the baker with the story that the Dubno Maggid brings, how he knew that the baker was the one who is going to die? He said, he brings a parable, which we spoke about when we spoke about the dreams. And he says what happened was, he says there was once a king, and this king wanted to build this magnificent painting on his wall. And he decided that he is going to find out the best painter in the world, bring him in, no matter the cost. He wants the most realistic painting possible on his wall. Remember, eh? So he goes and he searches high and low, and he finds the best painter by far. Charges an exorbitant amount of money. He says, money is not an issue. I want you to come. I want you to paint me the most realistic picture. So the painter says, fine. He starts, he quotes his price, and the king says, not a problem. He starts painting. And he starts painting, and as it's going on, it's magnificent. It's a painting of a person holding a basket of fruits. And after he finishes it, he says it was so real that people that were walking into the room where he was painting it saw the picture, and they thought there was a real person there, and they started speaking to the picture until they came closer, and they realized, wait, it's just a painting. So they go, and he shows the king the painting. Afterwards, the king says, magnificent. You live up to your to the words on the street. You live it up. He goes and he says, well, listen, full price, you're going to get paid for it. But he says, I'm going to give an option of a bonus. He says, we're going to put this on display, and we're going to have everybody come and critique it. If anybody's able to find an issue to critique it, the bonus goes from you and it goes to them. If they're not able to critique anything, the bonus goes to you. He says, Chazakabu, go ahead, go try. So they put this on display, and the king announces anybody who's able to find something wrong with this painting gets a reward. When the king says a reward, it's not $5. So people come from all sorts of places, and they look at the painting, and they look at it this way, they look at it that way. The painting was perfect. It was so perfect that birds were coming down and trying to eat the fruit on the platter. So meanwhile, there was an old man that was sitting in the back, and day after day, people just came. They tried to find, they couldn't find anything. Finally, this old man goes up to the king and says, I found the issue. So everyone's quiet. It's like, oh, so someone finally found an issue. The painter comes and he's listening, and he says, the birds are coming and they're eating from the fruit from the platter. And the king says, I know, amazing, right? And the wise man says, no. He says, if the bird would realize that the person who's holding the platter was really a human person and he was alive and well, they would never dare to go close to it. Have you ever seen a bird come in? Must be, in the bird's eyes, there's something going on over here. They realize that it's fake, that it's not real. The king was very nice. He says, you know what, you get part of the reward, and the rest they gave it to him. So it explains to the Maggid. Says Yosef, in the dream of the baker, he had three levels, and birds were eating from the top level. Says Yosef, why are birds not scared of your body? Why are they coming so close to you that they're eating from food on your thing? Must be that you're not alive, that you're dead. Yosef was able to look at the small details in life. Because he was able to look at the small details in life, that's where his success came. Because he was able to see God in the spices. Yeah, he saw God in the spices. But you know what? That was his outlook in life. He saw no matter what bad happened to him, no matter what, he saw God. And when you see God in the small things in life, there's nothing stopping you. You're seeing everything. He looked at the details. He says, many times in life, there's issues and there's things that come up. And we just don't get it. It's like God sending a sign here, just a sign there.
What about the guy that's the wine guy?
The wine guy had a different dream. He had a dream of 3 branches. And the branches, and he would took the grapes, and he actually poured the grapes, and so there was no dream of birds coming to him. So his dream,
something got raised up. So that
yeah. Well, there's a whole interpretation of it because it went from immature grapes to mature grapes, the speed of the process, and it was 3 days. I speak about it on the dreams class, but he also how it explains the dream. But the same idea. He looks at the details. He looks at the details, and he's able to tear it apart, break it apart, and it fit exactly where it's supposed to be. So. But you look at it, so he goes and he interprets his dream, and then he goes and he tells these two, the winemaker, well, he tells the winemaker because the baker's not going to make it. He says, listen, 3 days' time, God's going to, Pharaoh is going to go and he's going to take you out. Do me a favor, remember me. What did the winemaker says, buddy, please, I got you. Come on. We've been zombies for so long, don't worry about it. But you know what happens when people get high in power? Forget about everything that happened in the bat, and they completely forgot it for 2 years. He didn't mention it. 2 years later, Paul has a dream. He has a dream with the 7 cows and the 7 stalks, that whole story, and people try to interpret the dream, and nobody's able to interpret it. Finally, the wine guy says, wait a minute. He says, I know a guy who can interpret a dream. He says, a guy in prison. There's a Hebrew in prison that is able to interpret dreams. So Paul says, bring him in. So they bring him in, they clean him up, they bring him in, and they said, they go to Yosef, says, Yosef, can you interpret the dreams? And if you look in Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 41, verse 16, you know what Yosef replied to Paro? He says, Elokim Yaneh. He says, what do you mean? He says, I can't give you the interpretation. God will give you the interpretation. He's sitting 12 years in prison. What God? What God? He's saying, well, he says, I did everything right. He would be the person who had the most questions. Everything I did right. I did for you, God. What are you putting me in this situation? But he didn't say that. He didn't say, well, God, I don't believe in God anymore. You know what he said? He says, only God could interpret the dreams for you. And he goes, and he knew that, no matter how much his life was turned upside down, he knew that there was a God above him, and he was able to, and by the way, you know how he was able to get actually eventually and interpret God, Paro's dream? Also, the same idea, by looking on the small details in life. He was living a life that, he knew that God was always watching over him. No matter what the issue was, because he saw a little bit of sunlight over there, he says, aha, I see God over here. And this brings to mind this story that
actually says Biladai before he says Elokim Poter Chalom Torah, he says Biladai, which actually is even stronger. Biladai means
not for me. I can't even do anything. Right. Yeah. But exactly. He's like, it's like, and everything he was successful at that point in time. He could have said it was all me. What do you mean? I have a work ethic. A little bit credit. Yeah, nothing. He did zero. Unbelievable. The amazing. And this is, by the way, why you see Yosef, by the way. Here's a nice bit of Jewish information that most people don't know. Who was the longest person that ever ruled? Yosef. 80 years he ruled, from 30 to 110. The longest person that ever ruled in the Jewish history was Yosef HaTzadik.
He even ruled more than any pharaoh ruled.
Yeah. He was not. Well, I don't know. Could be. I'm not sure about that. But the same point. He was arguably one of the most successful Jews of all times.
I think he ruled more than anybody ever ruled in this face of the earth.
Could be. I don't know.
I think I read that.
Well, since we're talking about records, right? There was nobody in history who went from
nothing, right? From slave,
prisoner to become king.
Which, by the way, this is an important point to bring out.
The whole history
of the world. Yeah, it's a good point. It's unbelievable. You look at his story, it is unbelievable. We're not over yet, by the way. There's still a lot more to go in the story, but I want to bring this point. It is unbelievable what he went through. There were so many times that he could have been like, how many times that people come to me, I'm keeping Shabbat, I'm keeping kosher, I'm learning every single day. Where's my blessing? Where's my blessing? I'm like, read the story of Yosef. I don't wish it upon anybody to sit for 12 years in prison for some crime they didn't commit. But he sat for 12 years in prison, 1 year as a slave, for a total of 13 years, from 17 to 30. And not once he said, God, where are you? What's going on? He says, I thought that, I was doing the right thing. Not one, and non-stop, he did the right thing. This is such a strong lesson that we can learn. He says, in due time, look, he didn't question it, and look, he became the top of the top. We don't know what God does certain things. But one thing we have to know is we don't question it. We don't question it like Yosef did not question it. We believe like Yosef believed, and we believe like that we'll be successful like that. It is unbelievable power. Anyway, so I want to share with you the story. It's also a true story. There was a woman by the name of Mrs. Bernstein. She lived in a place called Emmanuel, and she had a very large family, and she was a seminary teacher in Yerushalayim, which is about a 30-mile trip from where she was until her seminary. So she was very happy to do it. She needed the money, for there was a very large family. So she would take every morning the bus to go to the seminary, and she would teach her classes. And then it would be enough time to run a few errands in Yerushalayim, and then take the trip back home in order to greet her kids off the bus. At that point in time. So this is the way that she used to spend. She would go on the bus. She would read Tehillim in the morning, and then get to seminary, teach, and that was her daily routine. One day, she's running extremely late, and she's realizing that she's either going to be able to eat breakfast or get the bus, but she can't do both of them. So she's going back and forth. She's like, I can't. I need to be on there on time. She skips breakfast and she runs to the bus. She gets on the bus in the nick of time. She gets on the bus. She's thinking, what? She's like, if I get to Yerushalayim a little bit earlier, I'll grab something to eat, and then I'll go run to teach my class. And for some reason, it got delayed, and she got to Yerushalayim the last minute. She was rushing, and she had to rush from the bus to her school. And she's going to her school, and she's sitting by the school. And meanwhile, she's starving. She's fasting unintentionally, and she's thinking, she taught the classes regular. She says, right after I finish class, let me run before I get the bus. Let me go run, pick something to eat. I'll eat on the bus on the way back. So she's running, she's going back and forth, she's going, she's rushing to the bus stop, and she looks at the clock, and she realizes she has to be back in Emmanuel in her town in a certain amount of time. If she doesn't make it this bus, she's going to miss her appointment. And she's like, all right, well, what am I supposed to do? So she goes and she skips her bus, and she skips her meal, and she goes and she gets on the bus. She's sitting on the bus, and they're driving, they're getting close to her town, and suddenly she hears a pop, and the bus starts to jolt. She's like, oh great, flat tires, like I'm never going to make it to my meeting. And then suddenly she hears another pop, and another pop, and she realizes it wasn't a flat tire. They were getting under attack. They were being ambushed by a bunch of terrorists, and the terrorists were attacking. They were shooting at them from the angles. So the bus driver tries to floor it. Everyone's screaming, get down, get down. Happens to be it was a bulletproof bus. And at this point in time, the terrorists, which knew what was going to happen, they shot both of the back tires. So only thing that was left was the two front tires, and it couldn't, it couldn't carry the weight of the bus. So the terrorists are shooting from all angles. People are screaming. People are, saying Shema. It's end of the world for them. And finally, the terrorist sees that they can't get through the bulletproof windows of the glass and things like that. So what they started doing is that they started climbing on the roof of the bus and going down and shooting down at the people from the roof of the bus. And everybody's screaming, it's terror-stricken. And everybody's down on the floor, and this Mrs. Burnson is down on the floor, and all of a sudden she hears Allah Akbar, and the shooting starts coming, and then suddenly she feels a pierce on one side and a pierce on the other side, and everything is wet, and she's in pain everywhere. She's been shot, and she's thinking at that point in time, that's it. It's over. So she's laying on her stomach, and she's going to turn on her back, getting ready to say Shema Yisrael and meet her Maker. She goes, and as she turns over to say Shema Yisrael, she looks up, and she sees a terrorist standing, right on top of her, with a gun pointing at her. And at that point in time, she knew it was over. Somehow, at that point in time, meanwhile, while the bus got hit, originally the bus driver radioed in for some help. At that point in time, when the terrorist was right on top of the bus shooting down at her, there was an army vehicle that was nearby that saw what was happening. It zoomed up and it hit the bus. So the terrorists went flying, and then they went on the shootout with the army and the terrorists, and they were able to, subdue all the terrorists. They were able to kill them all. And then the paramedics came, Zaka came, and they all came in, and they started pulling bodies after bodies out of this massacred bus. And she gets pulled out. The medic said, listen, she's not going to make it. She lost so much blood. We got to transport her to the closest hospital. So ordinarily, in such a situation where she had so much blood, she would ordinarily need one of the big hospitals in Yerushalayim, Tel Aviv, one of the big hospitals. But they're like, there's no time. They took her to the nearest, smallest hospital. And they ran to the hospital, and they said, they gave all the what was happening, and they rushed her right in. It just so happened to be that there was the biggest doctor in Israel in that small hospital. He was a surgeon, and he was teaching other surgeons a certain procedure. And when they heard that happen, so he was called right on site because he was the most qualified for it. And she went under 3-hour surgery to try to save her life. 3 hours go by. And, she's in the recovery. Baruch Hashem was successful. And, the surgeon comes to her afterwards. And, later she finds out that, it was just hashgacha, that it just so happened to be that the surgeon happened to be there at that time. And when she says the story, she's like, it wasn't just so happened to be. God orchestrated everything. But the surgeon goes over to her and he says, I'm so-and-so surgeon. I performed the surgery on you. Baruch Hashem, it looked like it was successful. But I have a question for you. She said, when I opened you up and we're doing surgery inside, I noticed that your stomach was empty. Did you eat anything today? And she's like, well, who cares? Like, what's the difference about that? And she's like, no, I happen to not been able to eat because, I was just running late from place to place to place to place. I wasn't able to eat. So he says you should know that the fact that you didn't eat is what saved your life. Because he said if you would have eaten, you would have had stuff in your stomach, your blood pressure would have been just slightly higher, and the blood would have came out just with slightly more pressure. You would have lost too much blood and you wouldn't have made it. And she goes, and Baruch Hashem, she made a full recovery. But the one thing that they asked her, they said, when you were laying over there and you saw the terrorist face to face, you saw his face, what was going through your mind? So she said, to be honest, she says, on the bus ride home, I was like, how are we going to pay the mortgage? They had money problems. What am I going to do with the shidduch for one of her daughters? She had another child that wasn't learning so well. Another person had another problem. She had problems after problems after problems while, sitting on the bus, and she was very nervous about what's going to happen. When she turned around, she says, and she looked up at the face of the terrorist, none of that mattered. She was like, to be honest, it was the most peaceful thing. I thought, it was all going to be over. And I knew at one point in time, it's all up in God's hands. There's nothing that I could do at this point in time. I'm just waiting for God. And guess what? God came and saved her. God, it was unbelievable. And she goes and and she explains, she's like, I couldn't eat breakfast. I was, and you think about it, I was suffering all day. I'm like, God, why are you doing this to me? I just want to have some food. I'm starving. And God says, no, you don't understand. My dear daughter, you need this. You need this. This is what's going to save your life. And she goes, and this is how much we have to think about in our daily life. There's so many things that things don't happen. Things don't happen the way we're supposed to happen. And one thing after another doesn't happen. And we're thinking, you know what, why is God doing this to us? I give this example, there's somebody who is going through a bunch of rooms, and he goes, he tries to open one door, it's locked. He tries to open another door, it's locked. Keeps on going to the door, lock, and he's like, God, what's going on over here? People go to this business, not successful. This business, not successful. Nothing successful. And they're like, what's going on over here? What are you doing? And God says, I'm directing you to the most successful place that you will ever have. And that's straight on. And we go through life, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have failures. And we have failures, and we're thinking, God, come on. He says, I'm doing everything that you asked me for. I'm doing this. And God says, listen, you didn't know the whole picture yet. He says, I'm directing you to your most successful part. Yes, you had some failures, but that's only because you were going in the wrong direction, and I had to put you on the right path. This was the power of Yosef. Yosef was able to see that even though things were not going the right way, but he's like, God has a reason. God has a plan. And you know what? Guess what? It was an amazing plan. He became the ruler, the most successful Jew in the history. Unbelievable plan. Let us continue with the story. I know it's getting late, so I apologize if anybody needs to leave. But we have to finish. I feel like I have to finish the story. This is not like a part two. This Yosef story has to be in a one-sitting type of situation. So we go to Parshat Vayigash. You think he's going and he's sitting and he's away from his parents for such a long time, and his brothers come. His brothers come to him right after how many years we're talking about over here. We're talking about over 20 years of not seeing them. All of a sudden, because what happened was just a timeline. So he was sold when he was 17. Then he was a slave for 1 year until he was 18. Then he was in prison for another 12 years. Then it was so he was 30. Then there was 7 years of plenty. And then so he's 37 at this point in time. Then there was 2 years of the starvation, and that's when the brothers came to see him. So he's at this point in time roughly about 39 years old. He was sold when he was 17. You do the math, that's 22 years. Right? He comes in, and the brothers come to him. What is a normal person, sees his brother after 22 years? What do they make fun of him? They sold him, the dreamer's coming. What is the first thing that you're going to say? Hey guys, guess what? You just bowed down to me. I'm Yosef. I was right, you were wrong. Yosef didn't say anything like that. The brothers made fun of him. The dreamer is coming. What did Yosef say? Yosef, when he revealed himself to his brothers, he's like, everybody out. I don't want to embarrass my brothers. I want everybody out. Not only that, this is the craziest thing. I'm getting excited. All right, this is the craziest thing. He pushes all his brothers out. He pushes all the servants out so that he doesn't get embarrassed, so that the brothers don't get embarrassed. Which means Yosef, 22 years he's away from his family, went through what he went through, and he doesn't even try to rub it in his face of his brothers. He says, no, I don't want you to be embarrassed. I'm sending you away. And not only that, he tells him, he says, you go look in Bereshit, in chapter 45. He says, he sends everybody away, and the brothers feel bad. They feel embarrassed. They're like, oh my gosh, this is Yosef?
Actually, he puts himself at risk.
He puts himself more than one time. Yeah.
There's no bodyguards.
Mm-hmm.
Now Yehuda has...
Yeah, he put himself at risk at his life to not embarrass somebody else. Unbelievable. Yeah, crazy. And he goes... And after that, so the brothers felt bad. They were like, oh my gosh, Yosef, he was right all along. We were wrong. So what would you think? You'd be like, okay, I was good until now. Yeah, bring it on, guys. Come on. Where's the apology? He doesn't even ask her. He says, no, don't worry about it. He goes and he starts saying, guys, hey, don't worry. He says, it's all from God. He says, don't worry about it. God sent me here because he knew what's going to happen. He says, it wasn't you. He goes over to the people that sold him as slave and caused them 13 years of misery. And he goes to them and he says, hey, it wasn't you. You know how many times in life that people go and they steal a few $1,000s, and we're like, that person is dead to me, or they go and something happens, and that 13 years, imagine getting locked up for 13 years in the worst prison in the world, meeting the person that locked you up when you did nothing wrong, and you're saying, don't worry about it, it was all part of God's plan, you're just a messenger. Unbelievable. This was what Yosef was. This is how it was. And furthermore, listen, this is amazing. Binyamin and Yaakov never knew that Yosef was sold as a slave. You realize that? There's a midrash that we said on Shabbat. In Parshat Miketz, the Ma'am Law brings about. It says, Yosef met with Binyamin. Thank you. Yosef met with Binyamin, and before that, he revealed himself that it was Yosef. And he says, and he goes, and he pulls out this ancient book. Thank you. He pulls out this ancient book to Binyamin. And Binyamin is sitting over here, not knowing that he's sitting next to his real brother, his full brother, Yosef. And he's thinking he's sitting in front of an Egyptian ruler. And he goes over to his brother, Yosef goes over to his brother Binyamin, and he takes out this ancient Egyptian book. And he says, do me a favor. He says, you know the wisdom in this book? So Binyamin says, it's an ancient wisdom that, and he's like, our father taught us this wisdom. And this book, with it, you will be able to find anything you need in the entire world. It was some sort of, I don't know if it was magical, what it was with astrology. And he goes and he says, we know. So he says, do me a favor. Your brothers are coming here. They're looking for your brother Yosef. Search in the book where Yosef is. So Binyamin says, fine, not a problem. He starts flipping through the pages, and he starts, doing all the process to find where he is. And he does it once, and he's like, something's wrong. He closes it up, opens up again. He does the whole thing again. And he keeps on. So Yosef goes over to him and says, what's going on over here? Why do you keep on starting over? And Binyamin says, I don't know. There's some, it's telling me that my brother is sitting right next to me, but it's only me and you over here, so it must be wrong. At that point in time, Yosef goes over to Binyamin and says, it is I am your brother, I'm Yosef. And he goes and he reveals himself to him. And he says, don't tell your brothers that, I'm going to reveal myself to them soon.
Why didn't they use this book before?
That's a good question. I had that question also. I don't know. So he goes, Yaakov, he goes and he comes down to Egypt. You would think, like one of the first conversations would be like, catching up. So where were you the past 22 years, my dear son? He's like, what happened? And you would think that Yosef said, listen, nothing. Yaakov never knew that his own children sold one of his other children. What happened was, and how do we know this? If you look in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 50, it says that when Yosef's brother saw that Yaakov was dying, that he passed away, so they went over and they sent messengers to Yosef. And they said, listen, your father, he was on his deathbed, and he said, please forgive my brother, please forgive, my sons for what they did to you, because they were nervous. And now, Yosef wasn't punishing them because Yaakov is still alive. He didn't want to, get any revenge. But now that Yaakov is dead, now it's payback time. So they said, listen, our father said, don't do anything to us. He's like asking you, please forgive us. Which means is, the Nachmanides brings down from this story, which means is that until this point in time, it's a proof that Yaakov never knew that his brother sold Yosef. Because if he knew, he would have told them straight up. He would have told Yosef, hey buddy, my dear son, please forgive them. But he never said anything because he never knew. And in fact, it says in Bereshit, in chapter 48, it says they go to Yosef. It says, behold, your father is very ill. Why did they have to go send him? Because Yosef did not go visit his father so much because he didn't want to have too much a long time that he would tell him, he says, what happened to you? He didn't want it to come out because if he would ask him, he would have to tell him. So Yosef kept his distance from his own father just so he won't have to go and tattle on his own brothers that they sold him. This was Yosef. This was Yosef that no matter what happened to him, he not only did he hold strong fast, he did not bend one iota and did not blame anybody else and realize that everything is coming directly from God. So, the question I want to deal with, and I need probably about 15 minutes, so again, if anybody needs to leave, I don't take it personally. So, there's a midrash that I want to bring out. Where did he get this power from? This is a really important part. How did Yosef get this power? It's unbelievable. Where did he get this power to do that from? And the answer is, he got it from his mother. And let's look at what Rachel, so, there's a midrash that says, Rav Shmuel bar Nachman said, that when the Bet HaMikdash was being destroyed, and the Jews were dying, and it was going through troubles and problems, and so Abraham goes over to God and says, save your children. God says, I can't. I'm in the chair of din. I'm in the chair of judgment. I can't move. So Yitzchak, he says, I was willing to sacrifice myself. Save your children. God says, I can't. I'm in the chair of judgment. Yaakov comes, I was with Esav, I was with Lavan, please I brought the 12 tribes, nothing doing. Moshe Rabbeinu comes, people come after, time and time again, nothing doing. Suddenly Rachel Imenu comes, and she goes and she says, when I was supposed to go and get married to Yaakov, Rachel says, and my father, Lavan, tricked my husband, and he said, you know what? No, Leah is going to get married. And you know what? I knew that that's what's going to happen. So what I did was I gave signs to Yaakov. So there's no hanky-panky going around. There's no tricks. So she goes on and she says, then the time came where it was the wedding night. And I saw that Leah was going to go up there. And if she goes up there and she doesn't know the codes, she's going to be embarrassed in front of everybody, in front of the entire wedding. And she says, I can't do that to my own sister. And she says, I went and I gave her my codes, my secret codes to let me know that it's me and it's not anybody else, to Leah, so that she could tell to Yaakov. So she goes on and she says, first of all, it continues. And it says that many years later, I want to give you a little idea of who Rachel Imenu really was. And why is it called Rachel Imenu, by the way? It's not Leah Imenu. We call it Rachel Imenu. So, not Rivka Imenu, even though they're all Ayimahot, but with the title Mama Rachel, the title Rachel Imenu is specifically titled to Rachel. So, many years later, Leah is having children, Rachel is still not pregnant. And meanwhile, the Reuven finds in the field something called dudaim. Dudaim is a, think of it as a fertility magic drug, that if you take it, you'll get pregnant. And Reuven he's going to bring it to his mother, Leah, to have the dudaim, because she didn't have a child in some time at this point. So Rachel sees it, and she goes over to Leah and says, please, can I have the dudaim? So, I don't have any children yet, you have some children. So Leah goes over to Rachel, and she goes and she says, you stole my husband. Now you want to steal also my dudaim? So Rachel says, no, listen, you know what? At that point in time, Yaakov would have a different time, different set times of who he was going to be with which wife. At that point in time, that night was supposed to be Rachel's turn. He says, listen, you give me the dudaim, I'll let you have Yaakov tonight. I made business deal. So they said, fine. And they switch it. But there's one point that I want to go back to that I said was, Leah told Rachel, you stole my husband. If Leah, what she could have said is like, I stole your husband. Oh, really? I stole your husband. He was my husband, Rachel could have said. He was my husband. I gave him to you so you don't get embarrassed. And Rachel never mentioned that. Never mentioned that. Leah never knew in her entire life that Yaakov was really supposed to marry Rachel. She thought her entire life Yaakov was supposed to marry to her. There's different proofs that we have. We don't have the time to go into that. But Leah thought that Yaakov was mine all along. And Rachel came out and stole my husband. And Rachel, if she would have wanted to, she could have spilled out the beans right away. She says, no, he worked for me for 7 years, sister. Right? He belonged to me, and I let you have him. But she didn't. She didn't say anything. And she goes over to God and says, I gave over my sister, my own flesh and blood, to my husband, and I never broke it to her. He says, please, for my sake, have mercy on your children. Your children went and they served the different, served Avodah Zarah, just like I didn't get jealous of my sister. Please don't get jealous when they're serving somebody else. It says in the Midrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu got up and went from the judgment to the cheer of mercy, to the din of Nachamim. He says, for you, that is right. I have to do that because that's how you lived your life. So we look at Rachel. Rachel lived her entire life, never rubbing it in her sister's face. She was willing to give up everything just so that her sister doesn't get embarrassed. She never told her sister, hey, by the way, he's my husband. You know where Yosef got the ability, the strength, to never say to his brothers, to his father, to Binyamin and to Yaakov, hey, by the way, you know how I got here? He got it from his mother. Because there's something called spiritual DNA. This is something that Rabbi Zachariah Wallerstein brings down, and I hold very strongly of it. I think it's an amazing idea. When you fix yourself in a spiritual sense, that goes, it's like, when you have physical DNA, which means you have blue eyes, there's a certain, percentage that your children will have blue eyes. Black hair, yada, 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 they look very similar. There's also something called spiritual DNA. You work on yourself spiritually, that goes on to your children as well. Rachel worked on her spiritually, and that went on to Yosef. And that went on to Yosef, and that's what he was able to get what he was able to get. I want to bring one last point. We focused a lot about Emunah. I want to bring the last point is the last 5 minutes. I want to bring on the Mussar that we could learn from Yosef as well. So Yosef, it says this is Rabbi Fran brings upon this, and Rabbi Fran on the Parsha. He says the brothers came and they came over to Yosef, and Yosef said 3 words, and that just shattered their entire world. What was the 3 words that he said? He says, Ani Yosef, or it's in English, it's I am Yosef. Really in Hebrew, it's 2 words. But he says, I am Yosef. And it says, Od Avichai, my father's still alive. That was the serious rebuke that anybody could have. And the Midrash says, which means woe is to us on the day of judgment. What's going to happen after 120? We're going to come in front of God, and God's going to say those same 3 letters. He says, I am God. And then everything in life makes perfect sense. You know why this happened? You know why this happened? Because I am God and I orchestrated everything. Think about it, what happened in Yosef's, for the brothers. The brothers sold Yosef. They thought they did the right thing. You look at it, they go and they didn't, for 22 years, their father was suffering, inconsolable. They still thought they were doing the right thing. They went and they saw the Shekhinah left. They still thought they did the right thing by selling Yosef. They suffered through a famine. still, they thought they did the right thing. They don't know what's going on over here. What's up with that? They went down to Egypt and they had to go, buy food. And then they were subjugated to being, being accused of being spies. Still thought they did the right thing. Their lives was in danger. They went and they found that there was the cup of the king was found inside one of the sacks, Benjamin's sack. They still thought that they were right. Troubles and tribulations were happening to them. They were like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And they couldn't realize it. And then the 3 words that came out from Yosef's mouth made everything just so clear. Because what happened was that they thought they were right all along. And then suddenly, Yosef comes over to them and he says, I am Yosef. And then suddenly, everything is clear. So, you know what? We're having so much suffering? We did something wrong the whole time. Yosef was right all along. And that was the biggest rebuke that's going to happen. After 120, we're going to come to God, and God's going to say, hey, guys, I am God. What happened? Where's all the signs? And then that's going to be the biggest rebuke. Now, the other question I want to deal with is, what happened to, Yaakov? How is it possible that the brothers didn't recognize Yosef? They looked exactly the same. Now, you guys heard this is he looked exactly the same as Yosef, and Yaakov looked exactly alike. How is it possible they couldn't recognize it? And the answer is very simple. The answer is very simple, is that if you're not looking for the truth, and if you don't believe that if the truth smacks you in your face, it's not going to change. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see it. They did not think at any point in time that Yosef was sitting in front of them. There's no way. They looked. You know where they looked at him? They looked at him in the prostitution houses. That's where they thought he would be. They was like, there's no way that he's going to be second to the command of the king. It's not possible. And Yosef was sitting there looking exactly like their father, and they were never able to put the 2 and 2 together. And this is something that's the final point that I want to bring out with. There's so many times that God sends us little reminders. Little reminders, hey, God forbid something happens. Wake up, hey, God's a reminder, do tshuva, do this. And again, sometimes people get reminder after reminder after reminder, and we're like those people that just don't get it. Like, the answer is right in front of your nose. God sends you again. If you have a problem, what does the Gemara says? If someone sees that he has suffering coming upon him, let him look inside. There's a reason why it's coming to you. God doesn't dish out suffering for just no reason. There's a reason. It's a wake-up call. Time to wake up. And this is something that I spoke about in Shabbat very strongly, and I would like to speak about it also over here. You know how many people we lost in our community in the past 2 years? And we're not God, and we don't know the reason for it. But at the same point in time, I want to share with you something. When about 6 years ago, my best friend passed away in a car accident. So at that point in time, someone came over to me and explained to me. He says, that even though whatever happens to the person, it's his time and yada yada, but everybody who was affected by that is a reason why they were affected by it, which means is you had part of that. You're supposed to get that suffering that you're supposed to have. And there's a reason for it. And what the reason is God sending you a sign to wake up. And I remember thinking, after going to the funeral and burying my best friend, I'm like, you know what, God, I don't need any more signs. I get the point. And I'm looking and I'm like, this community we had every few months burying another kid. And the question is, when are you going to wake up? When are we going to wake up? When are we going to start realizing that we have to do something? It's not going to, and people, what happens? They start a shiur once a week. Once a week of learning Torah is not enough. You need to learn every single day. And if you're not learning every single day, you're falling. What happened to Shabbat? What's going to, how many people need to die to people wake up? I'm sorry that I'm so, forward, but it's got to be said already. People are not waking up. The same cycle. We're stuck in the same thing. Where's Shabbat? Where's kosher? Where's the learning Torah? A woman, where's the tzniut? You know where the problem is in the generation nowadays with tzniut? Short skirts are not a problem. Pants are not a problem to many people. Where's the tzniut? How many wake-up calls do we need? How many wake-up calls do we need to finally go, God, I get it. I'll wake up. And that's what, that's what's going to happen after 120. God's going to say, I am God. Everything is going to make so much sense. And the last thing that I want to bring about is the fact that something I like to call world goggles. There are many people that they think certain things and they think it doesn't affect them. You know how many times people told me, like, don't worry about it. I can watch certain things. It doesn't affect me. I'm like, you're an idiot, you're a fool, and you're probably sick in the head if that doesn't affect you. What are you telling me if you're watching something that's not going to affect? Of course, if it doesn't affect you, you have to go into psychiatric evaluation. Why is it not affecting you? Wait, are you so desensitized to it? That's a very big problem. That means you're a very big pervert. And why is it not? And people, you know what it is? If you're watching something and you're thinking, okay, it doesn't affect me, then guess what? You're wearing world goggles. If you think that you'll be able to listen to music and this dirty music and it's not going to affect you, guess what? You're listening. I got that world. World goggles I like to compare it to beer goggles. Beer goggles is if you're sitting in a bar and you're chugging beers, the woman in front of you gets prettier and prettier after every time, right? It's basically just, making everything, not make sense. World goggles is the same idea in this thing. People could come and tell me I could go to bars and clubs. It doesn't bother me. I don't do it. I go for the music, the trance. I'm like, first of all, you got to be crazy, because the music that they do in the club is literally it's like somebody is on a keyboard and he's just having a seizure on it, and that's and it's so loud, and then that's not enough. Let me blind you with some lights, so that I can do that. And if that's not enough, let it smell of all the BO, and you have some glow sticks that to maybe show you the way to the bathroom or to safety and the exit. And people think, oh, it's okay. I'm not there to pick up any girls. You're wearing beer goggles if you don't think that affects you. It affects you big time. If people go and they're doing sins with women, and they're wasting seed, and they don't realize the problem with snoo, the problem with stealing money, and we're wondering why we have so many problems. What's going on, God? Why am I having so? Wake up and look around, and you realize that if God's sending you something, there's a reason for it. And if there is a reason for it, say, God, I get the point. No more. I don't need any more. There's so many things that are happening in our community, and Baruch Hashem, it's such a large community, but there's so many things again and again. And now I'm asking, please, let us not have any more tragedies. Let us not have any more of these things. Let us tell God we get the point. And Bezrat Hashem, let us get this lesson that we learned from Yosef, that when God's going to come and God's going to say, Ani Yosef, when we're going to come up to 120, and God's going to say, guess what, guys? I am God. And we'll be like, I know, because that's the way I live my life, and that's the way Yosef lived your life. And if you live that life, you will live an unbelievable, successful life. Just look at the story of Yosef. Never questioning, always having the Emunah, always having the faith, and it's going straight on full force. And you know what? He became the most successful. And B'ezrat Hashem, may we all become the most successful that we can be. Amen.